This video is just meant to be a quick distinction between two characters that I've mentioned before, Luthen and Saw Gerrera. Now, in Andor and in revolutionary movements in real history, these types of characters are not conducive to rebuilding the next step after the authoritarian or fascist government falls. These characters are excellent at tearing it down, but they are not the ones who rebuild afterwards. And so, symbolically and thematically, within the show and the movie Rogue One, they die, they fall, because as the rebellion moves into its togetherness stage and is primed to fight and win, and then through the original trilogy, rebuild afterwards, Luthen and Saw are characters that will not live through that, and so they die. But there is a very big distinction between Luthen and Saw. Both of them have extremist tactics and views, and Clay included. All three of them are willing to do the sort of terrorist attacks that cause innocent lives to be harmed and killed, with the hospital bombing that Clea does to go in and end Luthen's life off the respirator, and Saw Gerrera's attacks on the Empire often cause civilian casualties, which make him too extreme for other rebel leaders. Likewise, Luthen the same. He doesn't mind Gorman burning because he's not swept up in the small little deaths and the human loss, tragedy, and suffering, because he has this end game in mind, discovering what the Empire's end game is and beating the Empire's end game with his end game. But there is a very big difference between Luthen and Saw. Luthen is someone who still wants everybody together. He still wants to build the round table that we see in episode 12, Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, General Radis, Draven, and the others, all there discussing his death and the next steps to take. But he does not care about his own seat at the table. He just wants to build that table for everyone else, which reminds me actually of this long ago little story I read that I think was just in a collection of stories about King Arthur, sort of like fanfics made. I don't remember where I read this, but I was a kid back then when I read this. It was a story about this secret hidden knight who never had a seat at the round table, and his seat was like always empty, like no one took it, but he was never there, but not because he was dead, but because he helped everyone build it, but he was just never interested in actually sitting at the table. And this kind of reminded me of Luthen in this way. And again, this is just some like little kind of kid story, but it always stuck with me as like the heroes behind the curtain that you never know. And that's what Luthen is. But he's not like Saw, because for someone like Saw, the enemy never dies. Even if the Empire is taken down, from Palpatine to the last Stormtrooper, there will always be an enemy. And because of this sentiment, because of this worldview and his paranoia, he begins to see Mon Mothma and others as the enemy. And he calls her out and says, she's lying, and you're not trying to help me, and you're trying to expose me. And in Rogue One, those paranoid thoughts of betrayal and seeing the rebellion as the enemy lead him to almost ruin their entire plan by melting the brain of the escapee pilot with the Mor Gullet, I think it's called, or Bor Gullet. And Cassian and his crew get there to get him out. But if it wasn't for him, he would have ruined this plan, because that type of character in revolutionary movements in real life and in the show thematically cannot build the next step. Neither does Luthen, but Luthen wants other people to do so. Saw isn't really interested in building an alliance and building a system that works better. He's just interested in tearing down a system that's there because he is revolutionarily minded against it. Whereas Luthen is a rebel. And I have a philosophical video out about being a rebel versus a revolutionary as a pathway to reform. And Saw would be the revolutionarily minded person. Luthen is more of a rebelliously minded person. He's willing to do dark deeds, and he's willing to do those indecent things and use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. But he is not revolutionarily minded in that he will begin to see the rebellion and its leaders as the new enemy, because they are organized institutional power themselves. He understands that it's necessary to build that round table, but he just doesn't care about a seat at the table. And there's a really big distinction there between those two, although both need to pass for the next step of a revolutionary movement against a fascist authoritarian government to begin.